My beginnings as a filmmaker are maybe a little bit unusual. I was really fascinated with photography as a kid, and I shot a lot of Super 8 because when I was a kid it was still all home movies. And I would do narrative stories, but when I was in college, it was when the Reagan administration started to mess around in Central America. And I got really blown away by the story of some women who had been, who were nuns in El Salvador and been murdered. And after that happened, I was a freshman in college, and I started to really get active in politics there. And when I saw a film about what was happening in El Salvador, it hit me that there was absolutely nothing I could do with my life that would be more important than going to a place where lies were being told and bring a camera. I mean, it really was, in the world of clarity, it was right up there. So I started shooting, and back then it was big, huge 3/4-inch tape decks, U-Matic I think it was called, and then it would have a separate camera unit. And I shot film as well, but mostly what I was shooting was 3/4-inch tape. And I was very much part of like the early community television movement when we were sort of getting licenses from cable, when cable was young and cities were getting small community cable access channels. So I did a lot of that work in Syracuse, New York, and then a lot of my work was really very piecemeal, and I wasn't making full features as a filmmaker, but just kind of working in community television. And then as time went on, I started to make more narrative work. I think I maybe just wanted more control over the story or something like that. And I do love making narrative work, but there's a wasteful nature to it in terms of costume and food, and I don't know, it just, I hit another edge. And after a film that I made in the 90s, which is called Crocodile Tears, I pretty much left narrative work behind for a long time. And I went to Northern Ireland in 1998 to join the Good Friday Peace Agreement. And my job was to oversee cameras, 3 on the Protestant side, 3 on the Catholic side, who were documenting the behavior of the RUC during the transition. And oddly, I'm probably the most proud of that work in my whole life, even though a feature film was not the result. The result was that tapes were turned over to the committee that was overseeing the transition of the police force. And I think for me, there was a transformational understanding of the role of the camera as witness. It was the beginning of what has been over a decade now of increasingly sophisticated uses of camera as witness. Though that can also go in a bad direction, the majority of what I believe about camera as witness is that it's still in its infancy, and it's only going to continue in its importance. So Sweet Crude is really the chronicle of the development and the arc of the changes inside the movement called MEND, the Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta, a resistance movement in the Niger Delta of Nigeria. And that resistance sort of was born in late 2005 and had an arc that a lot of people would say really ended in 2009. And there are many open questions about MEND, not the least of which is, depending on who you talk to, these were either terrorists, criminals, freedom fighters, militants, certainly. And I think the truth of the matter is that depending on the moment in time you're looking, there's a little bit of all of the above, except that I would say never really full-on terrorists. But the sad, very sad truth about the story of MEND is that even since we completed filming Sweet Crude, things took really a terrible turn. And the question for MEND was always, would Europe, the US, and Canada pay enough attention before it would just become a struggle defined by guns? And I think I went through a personal understanding that was very new for me of just how important the role of Western media is in whether or not you make nonviolence an option. If you're never there filming what's happening to people, and there is no reality in the outside world of what is being done to them in the name, honestly, of getting our oil from under their feet, if they never have that story told in a wider way, sadly, they are reinforced in the belief that their only way out is to shoot their way out. They get reinforced in that every day. And so to me, part of my job felt like an urgent job to show up, and if I could tell the story as far and wide as possible, you know, sometimes I think I should have dropped everything and just tried to get a huge celebrity to go with me. Because to get attention for a story in Africa about a village being decimated over oil is awfully difficult. And, you know, we made as good a film as we knew how in the time period that we could to get it out there. And we've never had wide distribution, so, and we'll come to why I love organizations like Cinema Politica. We tried to make a film that was a little bit different, that wasn't the usual sort of victim and perpetrator look at Africa, and we tried to make a film that said directly to US lawmakers, what are you going to do about it? Because if you don't leave an out here that is nonviolent political transformation of power for people in the Delta, this will be a protracted civil war for years. Some good things have happened since then, but sadly I would say that we are in these waning days of the use of fossil fuel that, unfortunately, where the battle lines have been drawn are so severe and they're so profound in terms of the kind of power that oil companies and foreign governments that have been supported by oil companies, and now North American governments that are bought by oil companies. You put all that together into a Cuisinart and hit blend, and you have the world that we're living in. Well, certainly for us at Sweet Crude, we have enormous affection for Cinema Politica for many reasons. One of which is that I feel that Cinema Politica is making possible that very subtle, careful thinking documentaries that aren't often given anywhere else to live are not only given a place to live, but celebrated and understood for what they were meant to do. You know, sadly, the documentary form, as it explodes, as more people are interested, it also hits some of the same foibles of consumerism that other kind of media hit. So you see categories of documentary, which are perfectly legitimate, but they're always going to be funded, they're always going to have an audience, and they're also going to sort of tend toward, unfortunately, the sensational. So the God that gets served, even in stories about people who are marginalized and people who are voiceless, telling those stories in a way that serves sensationalism can be just as dangerous as not telling the story at all. So if you're trying to live up to your responsibility to tell a story in a place that, largely speaking, doesn't have its story told, and you try to do it in a way that's nuanced, and you try to be very responsible and careful and maybe even, I mean, it sounds lofty, but attempt to be poetic, attempt to really move hearts and minds. If you do all of that, it really is a struggle to find your audience. But Cinema Politica helped us to have an audience who wanted our film find us. And I'm now someone who's an absolutely huge fan, and I'll always be, both as a filmmaker and a film watcher, I'll always be devoted to Cinema Politica. For the rest of my career, anything I make, I will call Ezra right away and say, I want to show you this film, because I also just think his taste is, you know, of course I'm saying that because he liked my film, but I actually, then I look at the other things that he's liked and I thought, my God, this guy was basically like cut from the same cloth I was. I mean, he gets it, and that doesn't happen very often. You know, so I'm indebted, and really, what's the right way to put it? I'm enamored of a mission that's so important and that's being so well lived out.